My name is Margot, I'm 32 years old, and the moment I walked through my parents' front door that Thanksgiving evening, my sister Felicia screamed at me like I was a stranger who'd broken into her house. "Why are you even here?" she shouted, her face twisted with a rage I'd never seen before, spit flying from her mouth as my parents appeared behind her with expressions so cold they could freeze water. "You're not welcome here," my father added, his voice flat and final, while my mother stood silent beside him, refusing to meet my eyes. I was holding a homemade pumpkin pie I'd spent 3 hours baking, wearing the nicest dress I owned, and it arrived 30 minutes early like my mother had asked when she called 2 weeks ago and invited me with unusual warmth in her voice. But now I stood frozen in the doorway, my hands shaking so badly the pie nearly slipped from my grip, and through the archway into the living room I could see 24 extended family members staring at me with expressions ranging from shock to disgust. That's when I saw her, sitting at the dining table with a smug smile spreading across her face. The woman who'd vanished from my life 3 years ago without explanation. My former best friend Claudette, looking polished and expensive, and utterly triumphant. Before we dive into what happened next, I need to know where you're watching from. So drop your location in the comments below. If you've ever felt like the black sheep of your family, or been betrayed by someone you trusted, this story is going to hit different. Make sure to hit that like button because what I'm about to share will show you how family can be your greatest enemy and how I fought back against a conspiracy designed to destroy me. And subscribe, because you'll want to hear how this ends. Trust me, you won't see the twists coming. I need you to understand something about my family before I go any further, because without this context, nothing else will make sense. I've been the overlooked daughter my entire life, the one who is never quite good enough, never quite deserving of the same love and attention that my older sister Felicia received in abundance. Felicia is 35, a successful corporate lawyer, married to a wealthy man named Bradford, mother to 2 perfect children who attend private schools that cost more per year than I make in salary. She lives in a 6-bedroom house in the nicest suburb of Connecticut, drives a Range Rover, takes European vacations 3 times a year, and has never once struggled to pay a bill or worried about where her next meal would come from. I, on the other hand, am a social worker who makes $38,000 a year, lives in a modest apartment where the heat doesn't always work properly, drives a 12-year-old sedan with a cracked windshield I can't afford to replace, and am divorced because my ex-husband Fletcher decided he wanted more from life than what I could give him. The contrast between Felicia and me has been the defining feature of our family dynamic since we were children, and my parents have never tried to hide which daughter they prefer. When Felicia graduated high school, my parents paid for her entire Ivy League education at Yale, covering tuition, room and board, spending money, everything she needed, without question or hesitation. When I graduated 2 years later with better grades and higher test scores, they handed me a check for $5,000 and told me that was all they could afford, suggesting I attend community college and live at home to save money. Felicia got a brand new BMW for her 16th birthday, delivered with a giant red bow in our driveway while neighbors watched and applauded. I got nothing for my 16th birthday except a card with $20 inside and a lecture about being grateful for what I had. When Felicia got married, my parents spent $50,000 on a wedding that looked like something from a magazine, with 300 guests, an orchestra, flowers imported from Holland, and a dress that cost more than a semester of college. When I got married 4 years later, they gave me $2,000 and complained the entire time about how expensive everything was, suggesting I should just have a simple ceremony at the courthouse to save money. Every milestone in my life has been marked by their indifference or outright disappointment, while every achievement of Felicia's has been celebrated like she'd won a Nobel Prize. So when my mother called me 2 weeks before Thanksgiving and said she wanted me to come for dinner, that we needed to talk, and that it was important I be there, I felt something I hadn't felt in years when it came to my family. Hope. Her voice had been warm, almost affectionate, asking me how I was doing and actually listening to my answers instead of cutting me off to talk about Felicia's latest accomplishments. She'd specifically requested that I arrive early to help with the cooking, just like when I was a little girl and we'd spend time together in the kitchen before the chaos of family gatherings began. I'd been so touched by the invitation, so desperate for some sign that maybe things could change between us, that I'd spent money I didn't have on expensive ingredients for a pumpkin pie made from scratch, bought a new dress from a discount store that still stretched my budget, and practiced what I might say to her about rebuilding our relationship. I'd driven the hour and 20 minutes to their house in suburban Connecticut, with butterflies in my stomach, arriving exactly 30 minutes early as requested. Walking up the familiar stone path to the front door, with my pie in hand and genuine hope in my heart for the first time in years. But the moment I rang the doorbell and heard footsteps approaching, I knew something was wrong. The door flew open with such force it bounced against the interior wall. And there was Felicia, her face contorted with an expression of pure hatred that made me take an involuntary step backward. "Why are you even here?" she screamed, not asked, the words coming out like an accusation and an insult all at once. Before I could respond, before I could even process what was happening, my parents appeared behind her like sentries guarding a fortress. My father, Gerald, tall and imposing at 68 years old, looked at me with eyes that held nothing but contempt. "You're not welcome here," he said in that authoritative voice had used my whole life when delivering verdicts I wasn't allowed to question. My mother, Rita, stood slightly behind him, her arms crossed over her chest, her face turned away from me so completely I could only see her profile, her mouth pressed into a thin line of disapproval. The pie felt impossibly heavy in my hands, my new dress suddenly cheap and wrong, and through the archway I could see them all watching this moment unfold. Uncle Vernon and Aunt Shirley on the couch, cousins Bethany and Chester, near the fireplace, other relatives whose names I barely remembered, all of them frozen in place, all of them staring at me like I was something ugly and unwanted that had crawled up from beneath the floorboards. Then Felicia started listing my failures, right there in the doorway with the cold November air rushing in around me, her voice carrying through the house so everyone could hear every word. She called me a leech who'd spent her whole life trying to get money from the family, a pathetic failure who couldn't keep a husband, a jealous sister who resented Felicia's success because I'd never accomplished anything worth celebrating. She said these things methodically, like she'd rehearsed them, like she'd been waiting for this moment, and I tried to defend myself, tried to say that none of that was true, but my voice came out trembling and weak. I looked to my parents for some kind of intervention, some sign that they would tell Felicia to stop this cruelty, but they said nothing. They stood there in silence, watching their eldest daughter destroy their youngest, and their silence was more painful than any words could have been. That's when I finally looked past Felicia and my parents, past the shocked faces of my extended family, and I saw her. Claudette was sitting at the dining room table, like she belonged there, like she was part of the family, wearing an expensive-looking cream-colored sweater and designer jeans, her hair professionally styled, a leather handbag I recognized as costing at least $2,000 resting on the chair beside her. Claudette, who had been my best friend since high school, who had been closer to me than my own sister, who had disappeared from my life 3 years ago without explanation, blocking me on every form of communication, ignoring my desperate attempts to find out if she was okay, leaving me to file a missing person report and worry myself sick thinking something terrible had happened to her. And now here she was, in my parents' house, on Thanksgiving, looking at me with a smile that made my blood run cold, because it was the smile of someone who knew they'd won something I hadn't even known we were competing for. She stood up slowly, deliberately, like an actress taking the stage, and every eye in the room shifted from me to her. The silence that fell was absolute, broken only by the crackling of the fire in the fireplace and the distant sound of something cooking in the kitchen. Claudette walked toward me with careful steps, and when she was close enough that I could see the perfect makeup on her face, close enough that I could smell her expensive perfume, she began to speak in a voice that trembled with manufactured emotion. She said I had stolen from her 3 years ago, that I had manipulated our friendship to gain access to her bank accounts, that I had forged documents and transferred $40,000 out of her savings, leaving her destitute and broken. She said I had destroyed her life, that Shed trusted me like a sister, that the betrayal had been so devastating Shed had to disappear, just to protect herself from me. Tears began rolling down her cheeks, real tears or fake ones I couldn't tell, and her voice broke as she said Shed finally found the courage to come forward with the truth, to warn my family about what kind of person I really was. I felt like the floor had opened beneath me, and I was falling through empty space with nothing to grab onto. The accusation was so absurd, so completely disconnected from reality, that for a moment I couldn't even form words to respond. When I finally found my voice, it came out too loud and too desperate. "That's completely insane," I said. "I would never do that. I haven't seen or heard from you in 3 years." I told them all about how Claudette had vanished, how I'd tried everything to find her, how I'd been so worried I'd gone to the police, how I'd spent months wondering if she was dead or hurt or in some kind of trouble. But my words sounded defensive even to my own ears, and nobody in that room looked like they believed a single thing I was saying. Claudette pulled out a folder from her handbag, thick with papers, and she began showing documents to anyone who would look. Bank statements with my name on them. transfer records that showed money moving from her account to an account allegedly belonging to me, emails that looked like they'd been written by me, discussing the theft, planning the crime. The signature on the documents looked enough like mine to be convincing if you didn't examine it too closely. Felicia snatched the folder from Claudette's hands with the practiced efficiency of the lawyer she was, her eyes scanning each page with professional scrutiny. "This is damning evidence," she announced to the room, holding up papers like exhibits in a trial. "You're a criminal," she said directly to me, and the word hung in the air like smoke. My mother finally made a sound, a gasp followed by her hand covering her mouth, her eyes wide with what looked like genuine horror. My father's face turned a shade of red I recognized from my childhood, the color he became when he was about to deliver a punishment, when Head decided someone had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. "I always knew you were trouble," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "But theft?" I tried to explain that the documents had to be fake, that I'd never seen them before in my life, that none of this made any sense. But Felicia cut me off with a sharp gesture. "Always making excuses," she said. "Always playing victim. Always acting like the world is against you, instead of taking responsibility for what you've done." The extended family members began reacting then, their whispers growing into murmurs, and then into open comments. Uncle Vernon, who'd always been stern and judgmental, said I should be in prison. Aunt Shirley actually moved her children away from me, as if I was dangerous, as if I might attack them at any moment. Cousins I barely knew shook their heads in disgust, and I heard someone say disgraceful in a voice loud enough to be meant for me to hear. I looked around that room desperately, searching for even one face that showed doubt or sympathy, or willingness to hear my side, but there was nothing. They had already decided I was guilty. The trial was over before it began, and standing there with my stupid homemade pie still clutched in my hands, I finally understood what had happened. This wasn't spontaneous outrage over a recent discovery. This was orchestrated. This was planned. My mother's phone call inviting me hadn't been an olive branch or an attempt at reconciliation. It had been bait in a trap, designed specifically to get me here, so they could do this to me in front of everyone, so they could humiliate me and destroy me publicly, so they could make sure I understood exactly how little I mattered to any of them. My father held up his hand for silence, and the room obeyed immediately, everyone stopping mid-sentence to wait for whatever he was going to say next. He announced that we needed to have a family meeting right there, right now, to decide what to do about me, and whether I should be cut off completely from the family. I couldn't believe what I was hearing, couldn't process that this was actually happening, that my own father was treating me like a criminal defendant instead of his daughter. I begged them to listen, my voice breaking with emotion I couldn't control. "I'm your daughter," I said. "Please, you have to believe me. None of this is true." But my mother looked away, finding something fascinating about the pattern in the carpet, refusing to meet my eyes no matter how desperately I tried to catch her gaze. My father's expression remained hard and unmoved, and I realized with a sick feeling in my stomach that nothing I said was going to matter because they had already made their decision before I even walked through the door. Claudette continued her performance, and I had to admit she was convincing even though every word out of her mouth was a lie. She talked about therapy, about how the trauma of what I'd allegedly done to her had required years of professional help. She explained that Shed only recently found the courage to come forward, that Shed spent so long blaming herself and wondering what Shed done wrong to deserve being victimized by someone Shed trusted so completely. She described how Shed contacted Felicia 6 months ago with her evidence, how my sister had been investigating the situation ever since, gathering more information and preparing for this confrontation. That detail hit me like a physical blow, because it meant this conspiracy had been in motion for half a year, that Felicia had been planning my destruction for months while I'd been going about my life completely unaware. It explained why the family had been even more distant than usual lately, why my occasional calls to my parents had gone unreturned, why I'd been uninvited from my cousin's wedding last month at the last minute with barely an explanation. Then my father did something I'll never forget as long as I live. He went around the room person by person, asking each family member to state whether they believed I was guilty or innocent, forcing everyone to take a side and declare their position publicly. It was like something from a nightmare, watching my own family vote on whether to believe I was a thief and a liar. Aunt Shirley went first, saying guilty with such certainty you'd think Shed witnessed the crime herself. Uncle Vernon added that I'd always been sneaky as a child, a complete fabrication that rewrote history to fit their current narrative. Cousin Bethany, who I'd babysat when she was little, said she believed Claudette without hesitation. Cousin Chester looked uncomfortable, his eyes darting around the room, clearly not wanting to participate. But when the pressure of everyone staring at him became too much, he mumbled, "I guess guilty," and immediately looked at the floor. One by one they went. Every single person in that room. And not one of them defended me. Not one of them said maybe we should investigate further, or maybe we should hear Margot's side more fully, or maybe we should think about this before making such a serious decision. They condemned me unanimously, and when the last person had spoken, Felicia smiled at me with cold satisfaction and announced the verdict as if she was a judge delivering a sentence. My father then delivered the punishment with the formal tone of someone reading from a legal document. I was disowned. Effective immediately. I would be removed from the family trust, cut out of any inheritance, excluded from all legal documents that mentioned me as a beneficiary. I was banned from all future family events, including holidays, weddings, birthdays, graduations, and even funerals, which meant they didn't want me there even to mourn when someone died. He ordered me to leave the house immediately, and warned that if I tried to contact anyone in the family, they would pursue a restraining order against me. The words came at me like bullets, each one finding its mark, and I felt something breaking inside my chest that I knew would never fully heal. This was my family, the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally, protect me from the world, stand by me when times got hard, and they were throwing me away like garbage based on fabricated evidence from a woman who'd disappeared from my life years ago, and a sister who'd never liked me to begin with. But Felicia wasn't satisfied with just my removal from the family. She pulled out her phone and opened some kind of group chat that apparently included dozens of extended family members, relatives who weren't at the dinner, people spread across several states. She started typing furiously, posting about what had happened, sharing photos of the forged documents, telling everyone that I was a con artist and a thief who couldn't be trusted. She turned her phone toward me so I could watch in real time, as the messages started flooding in. Relatives I hadn't seen in years commenting about what a disappointment I was, how they'd always suspected something was wrong with me, how they'd never let me near their homes or their money. My entire extended family was being poisoned against me in minutes. My reputation was being destroyed across multiple states simultaneously, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. Felicia was thorough and methodical, making sure that even people who weren't at this dinner would know to reject me, ensuring that I'd have nowhere to turn within the family structure we'd been part of for generations. I don't remember walking to the door, don't remember my feet moving, but suddenly I was stumbling toward the exit with tears blurring my vision so badly I could barely see where I was going. The pumpkin pie slipped from my hands and hit the marble floor of the entryway with a crash that seemed impossibly loud, ceramic shards and orange filling spreading across the white tile in a mess that felt like a metaphor for my entire life. Nobody moved to help me. Nobody expressed concern about the broken dish, or asked if I was okay. Claudette's voice followed me out, calling after me with false sweetness, "Don't let the door hit you on the way out." And I heard laughter from somewhere in the room, actual laughter at my pain and humiliation. I ran to my car parked at the curb, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the lock. And as I finally wrenched the door open and collapsed into the driver's seat, I saw them through the window. They'd already closed the front door, and were going back to their Thanksgiving dinner, like nothing had happened, like they hadn't just destroyed someone's entire life, like ruining me had been nothing more than an inconvenient interruption to their holiday meal. I drove without knowing where I was going, tears streaming down my face so constantly that I had to keep wiping them away to see the road, my breathing coming in gasps that felt like I might be having a panic attack. Eventually, I had to pull over because I couldn't see anymore, couldn't focus, couldn't function, and I ended up in a grocery store parking lot, just sitting there in the dark with the engine off and the cold seeping through the car doors. 3 hours passed like that, me crying in waves that would subside and then come crashing back, checking my phone compulsively even though I knew what I'd find there. The family group chat that I was somehow still part of showed 37 messages, each one another nail in the coffin of my reputation. Relatives I'd thought were neutral, people who'd always been kind to me at gatherings, were now writing terrible things about me, calling me names, saying they'd always known I was trouble, expressing relief that I'd been caught before I could steal from more people. And then I saw a message from my own mother, posted publicly for everyone to see, and the words felt like they were burning into my eyes. "I'm ashamed to call her my daughter," Shed written, and multiple people had responded with sympathy for her, telling her it wasn't her fault that I'd turned out this way, that sometimes bad seeds grew despite good parenting. I checked my bank account through the app on my phone, something I'd been avoiding because I already knew how bad it was. $473. That was everything I had in the world. My rent was due in 1 week, $1,200 for my tiny apartment with the heater that barely worked. I had no savings because social workers don't make enough money to save. Living paycheck to paycheck was my reality and had been for years. I'd already been struggling before this happened. Skipping meals sometimes to make sure I could afford gas to get to work. Buying the cheapest possible versions of everything. Never going out or doing anything that cost money. And now I was going to be evicted, and I had no family to turn to for help, no support system to catch me when I fell. My ex-husband Fletcher had moved to California 2 years ago, and we barely spoke anymore. I didn't have close friends because being a social worker meant long hours and emotional exhaustion that left little energy for maintaining relationships. And my best friend had been Claudette, who had just destroyed my life for reasons I couldn't begin to understand. I found myself driving to the bridge that crossed the Hudson River. The old stone bridge with the pedestrian walkway that I had crossed dozens of times in my life without thinking about it. But tonight, I parked in the small lot at the base of the bridge, got out of my car into the freezing November air, and walked to the railing overlooking the dark water below. I stood there for a long time, my hands gripping the cold metal, looking down at the river and thinking about how easy it would be to climb over the railing and just let go. Nobody would miss me, I thought, my mind circling that thought over and over like a mantra. My parents had just publicly disowned me. My sister hated me. My extended family believed I was a criminal. I had no friends, no money, no future that I could see from where I stood in that moment. The pain in my chest felt like it was crushing me from the inside, making it hard to breathe, making me wonder what the point was of continuing to fight when everyone I'd ever cared about had decided I was worthless. I was so tired of being the scapegoat, tired of never being good enough, tired of fighting for scraps of love from people who would never give it to me, no matter what I did. My phone rang, the sound jarring in the quiet night, and I almost didn't answer because I assumed it was someone else from the family calling to tell me what a terrible person I was. But the number was unknown, not saved in my contacts, and something made me swipe to accept the call. A woman's voice came through, hesitant at first, saying my name like a question. Margot? It's Deanna. We worked together 5 years ago at the social services office before I moved to Boston. I remembered Deanna vaguely, a sharp woman with kind eyes who'd been good at her job, someone I'd respected but hadn't kept in touch with after she left. She explained that Shed somehow been added to the family group chat, possibly because Shed met my mother once at a work event and my mother had gotten her number, and Shed seen all the messages accusing me of theft and fraud. Something doesn't smell right, she said, her voice firm and clear. None of this makes sense. Can we talk? I broke down crying on the phone right there on the bridge, everything pouring out in a jumbled mess of words and sobs, and Deanna listened to all of it without interrupting. When I finally finished, when Ed told her about Thanksgiving and the accusations and the disownment and how I couldn't see any reason to keep going, she said something that changed everything. Come to Boston. Stay with me. We'll figure this out together. I promise you, if something seems this wrong, there's a reason, and we're going to find it. I pulled back from the railing, my hands releasing the cold metal that I'd been gripping so tightly my knuckles had gone white. Standing there in the freezing November darkness, I realized that if I gave up now, Claudette would win. Felicia would win. They would have successfully destroyed me, and they'd go on with their lives never facing any consequences for what they'd done. Something about that thought made me angry, instead of sad for the first time since this nightmare began, a hot spark of rage that cut through the fog of despair. I walked back to my car, got in, and started driving north toward Boston without going home first to pack or plan or think about what I was doing. The drive took 4 hours through the night, and the whole way I kept thinking about that moment on the bridge, about how close I'd come to letting them win, about how I'd almost let their lies become the final truth of my life. Deanna had become my first ally in this fight without even knowing she was signing up for it, the first person to express doubt about my guilt, and that small gesture of belief had literally saved my life. Deanna lived in a small apartment in Cambridge with 3 cats and more books than I'd ever seen in a personal residence, stacks of them on every surface, covering topics from forensic accounting to psychology to true crime. She let me cry when I arrived just after midnight, made me tea even though I couldn't taste it, and wrapped me in a blanket on her couch, without asking for any explanations beyond what I'd already told her on the phone. But when morning came and I'd slept a few fitful hours, she sat down across from me with a notebook and a serious expression, and said we needed to approach this logically. Who benefits from destroying you? She asked. And that question opened up an entire line of thinking I hadn't considered in my emotional devastation. I'd been so focused on the pain of being rejected, and the confusion about why Claudette would lie that I hadn't stopped to think about motive, about who gained something from my destruction. We spread out photos I'd taken on my phone of the documents Claudette had shown everyone, the bank statements and transfer records and emails that had looked so convincing to my family. Deanna had worked in fraud investigation before moving to social services, and she examined everything with a professional eye that caught details I would never have noticed. She pointed out that the bank routing numbers on the statements didn't match any real bank that existed 3 years ago, that the email addresses used a domain that hadn't been registered until 2 years ago, according to a quick internet search, that the signature that was supposed to be mine looked traced, rather than naturally written. "This is amateur forgery," she said. "Good enough to fool people who wanted to believe it but wouldn't hold up for 5 minutes under legal scrutiny." "So why hasn't Claudette gone to the police with this evidence?" she asked. And the answer was obvious once she said it. Because it's fake. And the police would discover that immediately, and Claudette would end up being the one facing charges. Deanna had contacts at various banks from her fraud investigation days, people who owed her favors or were willing to bend rules for a friend, and she made a series of phone calls that pushed the boundaries of what was legal but got us information we desperately needed. Claudette had indeed lost $40,000 3 years ago. That much was true, but it hadn't been stolen from her account by anyone. She'd invested the money in what turned out to be a pyramid scheme, one of those multi-level marketing scams that promised huge returns and delivered nothing but losses. Claudette had gone all in, convinced she was going to get rich, and instead Shed lost everything and ended up declaring bankruptcy. That was why Shed disappeared so suddenly 3 years ago, why Shed blocked me and everyone else who knew her, not because I'd done something to her, but because she was drowning in shame and debt, and couldn't face anyone who knew about her failure. The next discovery came from Deanna's deep dive into social media and public records, the kind of internet detective work that takes hours of tedious searching but sometimes reveals crucial connections. Claudette and Felicia had been friends for the past 7 months. They'd been photographed together at charity events, standing side by side at some country club function, tagged in posts at expensive restaurants. They were connected on LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, all the platforms that I'd been blocked from, so I'd never seen any of this. 3 months ago, Felicia had hired Claudette at her law firm as a paralegal, despite Claudette having no legal background or relevant qualifications. These two women, who had supposedly never been close before, had suddenly become best friends right around the time this whole conspiracy began, and that couldn't be a coincidence. Deanna found the smoking gun in public records that anyone could access if they knew where to look. Our family had a trust that had been established by my grandparents decades ago, and the terms of that trust were a matter of public record filed with the state. According to those documents, I was entitled to 30% of the trust when my parents died, with Felicia receiving 60% and 10% going to charity. The trust was currently worth approximately $2.3 million, which meant my share would be $690,000. But the documents also specified that if any beneficiary was convicted of a crime, or formally disowned by the family trustees, which were my parents, their share would be redistributed to the other beneficiaries. If I was cut out, Felicia would receive my entire portion, nearly $700,000 extra beyond what she was already getting. She stood to gain more money than I'd earn in 15 years of working as a social worker, and all she had to do was destroy my reputation so completely that our parents would disown me and remove me from the trust. The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. Felicia had orchestrated everything from the beginning. Shed found Claudette, who was desperate and broke and bitter about her own failures, and Shed offered her money to participate in a scheme to frame me. They'd created the fake evidence together, probably with help from people at Felicia's law firm who had the skills to forge convincing documents. Felicia had then manipulated our parents over months, slowly poisoning them against me, telling them stories and planting doubts, preparing them to believe the worst when the accusation finally came. The Thanksgiving dinner had been the culmination of months of planning, a trap set specifically to humiliate me publicly and give our parents the excuse they needed to disown me formally. My mother's warm phone call inviting me hadn't been a moment of affection but rather bait, getting me there so they could spring the trap with maximum impact in front of the entire family. This wasn't just spontaneous cruelty or a family disagreement that got out of hand. This was premeditated, calculated destruction of another human being for financial gain. My own sister had spent months planning how to steal from me and ruin my life, had recruited help, had created false evidence, had manipulated our elderly parents into doing her dirty work. Shed used every ounce of her legal training to construct a scheme that would be convincing enough to fool our family but didn't need to be perfect because she never intended to go to real authorities. The trust would be modified. It'd be cut out. and Felicia would get nearly $700,000 extra while I lost everything. The cold calculation of it made me feel physically ill, but it also gave me something I hadn't had since that Thanksgiving dinner: clarity, understanding, and most importantly, a path forward. Deanna looked at me across her cluttered table, covered in printed documents and scribbled notes, and said we needed real evidence, not just theories and connections. We needed to prove the documents were forged, prove that Felicia and Claudette had conspired together, prove that this was all a setup. The family wouldn't listen to me just explaining what we'd discovered, because they'd already decided I was a liar. We needed to make them listen, force them to see the truth, expose Felicia and Claudette so completely that there would be no room for doubt. How? I asked. Because they all hate me and won't let me anywhere near them. Deanna smiled, a fierce expression that made her look dangerous. Then we make them listen, she said, and we started planning. Deanna called in a favor from a professional contact, a document examiner named Simon, who testified in court cases about forgeries and fraud. We met him at a coffee shop in downtown Boston, where he examined the photos of Claudette's evidence with a jeweler's loupe and various tools he kept in a small leather case. 2 hours later, after taking measurements and making notes and comparing details against databases on his laptop, he delivered his verdict with absolute certainty. Definitely forged, he said, and not even a particularly good forgery once you know what to look for. He pointed out telltale signs of digital manipulation, showed us how the signature had been created, by tracing an authentic signature and then slightly altering it, explained how the document metadata would prove they'd been created recently, rather than 3 years ago. He offered to write a detailed forensic report that would be admissible in court, complete with technical analysis and his expert testimony, and I spent my last $300 paying him for that report, even though it meant I'd have nothing left for food or gas. The next step required resources I didn't have, so I did something desperate. I contacted a private investigator named Rochelle, a woman in her 50s with short gray hair and the hardened expression of someone who'd been a cop for 20 years before going private. I explained my situation and told her I could only afford to hire her for 1 day, 16 hours maximum, and that I needed her to follow Claudette and find out what she was really doing with her life. Rochelle looked at me with sympathy that made me want to cry, and said she'd do it for half her normal rate because she hated people who framed innocent victims. She spent an entire day and night following Claudette around Boston, documenting everything with photographs and video, and written notes that she compiled into a report. What Rochelle discovered contradicted everything Claudette had claimed about being destroyed by my alleged theft. Claudette was living in an expensive apartment in downtown Boston, the kind of place that cost at least $3,000 per month in rent. She drove a new Mercedes that was maybe a year old at most, worth at least $60,000. She wore designer clothes, carried bags that cost thousands, ate at expensive restaurants, lived a lifestyle that was completely impossible for someone who'd supposedly lost all their money and been financially ruined. Where was this money coming from? Rochelle had her ways of finding things out, methods that existed in the gray area between legal and illegal, and she obtained Claudette's recent bank statements through means she refused to explain. There on the records was a smoking gun, a large deposit from 6 months ago, $50,000, wired into Claudette's account from a company called FC Legal Consulting. FC were Felicia's initials, and a quick search revealed that FC Legal Consulting was a shell company registered to Felicia's business address. My sister had paid Claudette $50,000, direct payment for participating in the conspiracy to frame me. But the most valuable piece of evidence came from Rochelle's willingness to bend the law in ways I probably shouldn't have agreed to, but was desperate enough to accept. She'd managed to plant a listening device in Felicia's law office, hidden in a decorative plant on the bookshelf, and she'd captured multiple conversations over the course of a week. Most of it was boring legal talk about cases and clients, but one conversation made my blood run cold and hot at the same time. Felicia's voice, unmistakable and clear, saying the family completely bought it and Margot's finished. Claudette laughing and responding that she'd almost felt bad seeing my face, but $50,000 helped with the guilt. Felicia promising another $20,000 bonus once the trust was officially changed and I was removed from the documents. The two of them laughing together about how I'd never seen it coming, about how easy it had been to manipulate everyone, about how weak and trusting I'd always been. Your sister never had a chance, Claudette said on the recording, and Felicia responded that I was always weak, and this was easier than she'd thought it would be. Listening to that recording felt like being stabbed repeatedly, hearing the contempt in my sister's voice, understanding the depth of her hatred for me, realizing that she didn't just want the money, but actually enjoyed my suffering. This wasn't a desperate act by someone in financial trouble. Felicia was wealthy, successful, had everything she could possibly need. But Shed orchestrated this elaborate scheme anyway, because she hated me enough to want to destroy me completely. The cruelty of it was staggering. And sitting in Deanna's apartment, listening to the recording play over and over, I realized that Felicia had probably been undermining me to our parents for years, poisoning them against me slowly and deliberately, setting the stage for this moment long before the actual plan began. Every family gathering where they'd favored her, every time they'd dismissed my achievements while celebrating hers, Felicia had likely been in the background encouraging their bias and deepening their contempt for me. A surprise ally emerged when my cousin Chester called me out of nowhere, somehow getting my number from Deanna, who I'd listed as an emergency contact at my old workplace. Chester's voice was shaking when he spoke, saying Head felt terrible since Thanksgiving and couldn't sleep at night anymore. He confessed that he hadn't believed I was guilty, but had voted against me because Felicia had threatened him privately before the dinner. Shed told him that if he didn't condemn me publicly, Shed make sure our grandfather's inheritance that was supposed to go to him would be redirected elsewhere, that she had the legal power and family influence to cut him out just like they were cutting me out. Chester was weak and scared and had buckled under pressure, but now the guilt was eating him alive and he wanted to help. He provided insider information about family dynamics, told me that our parents were having doubts, that our father had been asking questions about the evidence, that our mother had been crying and seemed conflicted about what they'd done. With all this evidence compiled, we made a plan that was risky but felt like the only option available. Christmas dinner was in 3 weeks at my parents' house, another big family gathering where everyone would be present. I would crash that dinner uninvited, bring all the evidence we'd gathered, and expose Felicia and Claudette in front of the entire family. It would be a confrontation, probably ugly and definitely dramatic, but it would force everyone to see the truth all at once instead of trying to convince them individually, while they refused to take my calls. Deanna helped me organize everything into clear folders, one for each family member, with printed copies of Simon's forensic report, Rochelle's investigation findings, the bank records showing Felicia's payment to Claudette, and transcripts of the incriminating recorded conversation. Simon agreed to appear on video call to explain his findings as an expert witness. Chester agreed to speak up and support me when the moment came. Rochelle offered to come along as security in case things got physical, which seemed increasingly possible as we imagined how Felicia might react to being exposed. I practiced what I would say over and over, rehearsing in front of Deanna's mirror, trying to find a way to present the information that was calm and factual, rather than emotional, because I knew if I let my anger or hurt take over, they'd dismiss me as hysterical. December 25th arrived with clear cold weather, the kind of bright winter day that felt wrong for what I was about to do. I drove from Boston to Connecticut with Deanna in the passenger seat and Rochelle following in her own car, arriving at my parents' house at 6 in the evening when I knew dinner would be in full swing. I parked down the street where my car wouldn't be immediately visible and walked to the house I'd grown up in, my heart pounding so hard I thought everyone within 100 feet must be able to hear it. Through the large front windows I could see them all gathered in the living room and dining room, probably 25 people, holding wine glasses and plates of appetizers, laughing at something someone had said. Felicia was holding court in the center of the room, animated and confident, everyone's attention focused on her as she told some story with grand gestures. Claudette sat on the couch next to my mother, close and familiar, looking like she belonged there more than I ever had. The scene looked perfect and happy, a family celebration untouched by any darkness, and I almost turned around and left because who was I to ruin their Christmas with my accusations and drama? But then I remembered the bridge, remembered standing there in the freezing dark ready to end everything, remembered the recording of Felicia and Claudette laughing about how easy it had been to destroy me, and I walked up the stone path and rang the doorbell. My father opened the door, his face going from pleasant holiday expression to shocked recognition to anger in the span of about 2 seconds. "What are you doing here?" he said. Not a question, but an accusation, his hand gripping the doorknob like he was preparing to slam it in my face. I told myself I was not allowed to be scared. I had a right to be here, and I made my voice as steady as I could manage. "I have something everyone needs to see," I said. "Something that will explain everything that happened at Thanksgiving." Felicia appeared behind him immediately, her lawyer instincts sensing trouble, her face twisting into fury when she saw me. "Are you insane?" she hissed. "Get out before I call the cops and have you arrested for trespassing." I pushed past them, Not physically shoving, but just walking forward with enough determination that they had to step aside or block me completely. And I went straight into the dining room, where I could see everyone. The conversation stopped mid-sentence. Wine glasses froze halfway to mouths. Someone dropped a plate that shattered on the floor, and 24 pairs of eyes locked onto me with expressions ranging from shock to disgust to confusion. Claudette's smirk appeared immediately, that same self-satisfied smile from Thanksgiving, and she said in a voice loud enough for everyone to hear, "This should be entertaining." I pulled out the folders I'd been carrying, thick manila envelopes with names written on each one, and I started distributing them to family members before anyone could stop me. My parents hesitated but took theirs. Uncle Vernon looked angry but accepted his copy. Cousins and aunts and uncles all found themselves holding folders they hadn't asked for. And Felicia was screaming at me to stop, demanding I leave, threatening legal action. I went to the head of the dining room table, the spot where my father usually sat to carve the turkey or make toasts, and I stood there, facing everyone with my back straight, and my voice as calm as I could force it to be. "I know you all think I'm a thief," I said, each word careful and clear. "I'm here to prove I'm not, and to show you who the real criminals are." Felicia cut me off immediately, her voice sharp and authoritative. "We've seen the evidence. You're done. Just leave before you embarrass yourself further." But Eid prepared for this, anticipated every objection, and I kept talking over her interruptions. "Then you won't mind seeing more evidence," I said. "Please open your folders." Some people did immediately, curiosity overcoming their hostility. Others hesitated, looking to my parents for guidance. But my father nodded slightly, and they began opening the envelopes and pulling out papers. I presented Simon's forensic report first, explaining in terms simple enough for everyone to understand how the documents Claudette had shown at Thanksgiving were provably fake. I showed the side-by-side comparison of the forged signature next to examples of my real signature, pointed out the bank routing numbers that didn't exist, highlighted the email domain that hadn't been registered 3 years ago when the theft supposedly occurred. Simon appeared on my laptop screen via video call that I'd set up on the table, and he confirmed his findings in professional language that carried weight, explaining that Head testified in dozens of cases, and these documents were definitely forgeries that wouldn't hold up under any legitimate scrutiny. Felicia started interrupting loudly, saying this was ridiculous, accusing me of paying someone to create fake reports to cover my guilt, insisting that everyone was watching me manipulate them in real time. But my father, surprisingly, held up his hand and told her to be quiet. "Let her finish," he said, and Felicia's face went red with frustrated rage. I showed them Claudette's bank records next, the pages highlighted to draw attention to the $50,000 deposit from FC Legal Consulting. I explained that FC was Felicia's shell company, that this was direct payment for Claudette's participation in framing me, that Claudette had claimed she was broke and destroyed by my alleged theft, but was actually living in luxury funded by my sister's money. Claudette's face went from smug to panicked, and she immediately started making excuses, saying the money was payment for legitimate legal services Shed provided. But I was ready for that too, pointing out that she had no legal training, no license, no credentials that would justify a $50,000 payment, and several people in the room who knew about legal fees were already looking skeptical. Then I played the recording, and the room fell into absolute silence. Felicia's voice came through the laptop speakers with perfect clarity, talking about how the family had bought their lies completely, how I was finished, how easy it had been to manipulate everyone. Claudette's voice admitting the money had helped her feel less guilty about destroying me. Felicia promising additional payment once the trust was changed. The two of them laughing about my weakness, my trust, how I'd never seen it coming. My mother stood up so fast her chair fell backward, her hand covering her mouth, her eyes wide with horror. My father's face turned that dangerous shade of red again, but this time he was staring at Felicia with an expression I'd never seen him direct at his favorite daughter. Multiple people gasped audibly, and I heard Uncle Vernon say something under his breath that sounded like disbelief. Felicia didn't accept defeat gracefully, or admit what she'd done. Instead, she pivoted immediately to a new attack, her legal mind working fast to find a defense. "That recording is fake," she shouted, her voice desperate and angry. "Margot created it with artificial intelligence. She's fabricating evidence because she's so desperate to avoid taking responsibility for what she did. She's a liar and now she's a forger too. She's even worse than we thought." Claudette joined in, her voice high and panicked. "I can't believe Shed stooped this low. This is insane. None of that conversation ever happened." Some family members looked confused, uncertainty crossing their faces, and Aunt Shirley asked how we could know what was real anymore. The moment was slipping away from me. Felicia was managing to plant just enough doubt, and I felt panic rising because I'd come so far and gathered so much evidence, but they still might not believe me. That's when Chester stood up, his legs shaking so badly I could see his pants trembling. He cleared his throat twice before he could speak, and when his voice came out it was quiet, but everyone heard it in the silence. "I need to say something," he said, and then he confessed everything. He told them about Felicia's threats before Thanksgiving, how Shed promised to cut him from grandfather's inheritance if he didn't vote to condemn me, how Head never actually believed I was guilty, but had been too scared to stand up for me. Other cousins started reacting then, Bethany admitting that Felicia had pressured her too, another cousin saying Head felt uncomfortable about the whole thing but hadn't wanted to go against the family. The pressure campaign Felicia had run was being exposed, her manipulation of everyone becoming clear, and the doubt that had been creeping into people's expressions was transforming into something else: anger, realization, understanding that they'd been used. I turned to face my parents directly, and I asked them the question that had been burning in my mind since Thanksgiving. "Did you know about this? Were you part of Felicia's plan, or were you manipulated too?" My mother started crying. Real tears this time, instead of the performative emotions Shed shown at Thanksgiving. "We were trying to protect the family," she said, which wasn't really an answer. My father looked old suddenly, older than I'd ever seen him, and he said Felicia had showed them the evidence and they'd believed her, because she was a lawyer, and they'd trusted her professional judgment, but I wasn't letting them off that easy. "You didn't even ask for my side," I said, my voice breaking despite my efforts to stay calm. "You invited me to Thanksgiving just to humiliate me in front of everyone. You didn't protect me. You didn't believe in me. You chose Felicia over me without even giving me a chance to defend myself." My mother had no response to that except more tears, and my father's jaw clenched in that way it did when he knew he was wrong, but didn't want to admit it. Felicia's breakdown was spectacular. Cornered from all sides, her carefully constructed lies falling apart, she stopped trying to defend herself logically and just started screaming. "You've always been jealous of me," she yelled at me across the room, pointing an accusatory finger. "I'm the successful one. I'm the one who made something of herself. You're just a pathetic social worker who couldn't even keep her husband. You don't deserve 30% of the trust. You haven't earned it. You've never accomplished anything worth rewarding." The mask came completely off, all the composed lawyer demeanor dissolving into raw hatred and resentment, and everyone in the room could see the truth of who Felicia really was underneath the professional exterior. She kept going, listing all my failures and inadequacies, explaining why she deserved my share of the trust, essentially confessing to everything while trying to justify it. "Why should you get hundreds of thousands of dollars when you've done nothing with your life?" she screamed, and my father finally reacted. Claudette saw the situation collapsing and tried to escape, grabbing her expensive purse and heading for the door with quick, desperate steps. But Rochelle had positioned herself there, blocking the exit with her arms crossed and her ex-cop authority radiating from her posture. "I think you should stay and face the consequences," Rochelle said in a voice that made it clear this wasn't a suggestion. Claudette looked around frantically like a trapped animal, and then she started crying, real tears of panic, rather than the fake tears Shed used to manipulate everyone at Thanksgiving. She threw Felicia under the bus immediately, confessing that Felicia had approached her with the plan, that Felicia had created the fake documents, that Felicia had promised her money if Shed helped frame me. "I didn't think anyone would actually get hurt," Claudette sobbed, which was such an absurd lie that several people actually laughed bitterly. My father stood up from his seat with a gravity that silenced everyone in the room, and he turned to face Felicia with an expression I'd never seen him direct at her in my entire life. Disappointment. Real, deep disappointment mixed with anger and something that might have been disgust. "You manipulated us," he said, each word deliberate and heavy. "You lied to us, to the entire family. You tried to steal from your sister and destroy her life." Felicia tried to respond, tried to justify herself one more time, but he cut her off with a gesture. "Get out of my house," he said, and the room went absolutely still. Felicia looked shocked, genuinely stunned, like Shed never considered this outcome was possible. "Dad, you can't be serious," she said, her voice losing its aggressive edge and becoming almost pleading. "I am serious," he responded. "You're the one who's not welcome here. Leave now." Felicia turned to our mother desperately, looking for support, looking for someone to defend her the way they'd always defended her, but Mother just turned away with tears streaming down her face, unable or unwilling to meet Felicia's eyes. "Bradford," Felicia's husband, who'd been sitting quietly in the corner looking mortified through all of this, finally stood up and grabbed their coats from the closet. "Let's go, Felicia," he said quietly. And there was something in his tone that suggested this wasn't just about leaving the party. Felicia screamed as they walked toward the door, her voice rising to almost hysterical levels. "You'll regret this. All of you. I'll make sure you regret taking her side over mine. You have no idea what I'm capable of." But her threats sounded hollow now, pathetic rather than frightening, and as the door closed behind her, I felt something release in my chest that I hadn't realized I'd been holding since Thanksgiving. The police were called, not by me but by my father, who said there needed to be legal consequences for what Claudette had done. She was arrested right there in the living room, handcuffs clicking into place on her wrists while she sobbed and begged for forgiveness. She looked at me with streaming mascara and desperate eyes, saying she'd been desperate for money, that she'd needed help, that she was sorry, and could I please forgive her. I looked at her without any emotion I could identify, feeling mostly empty, and I said no. "You tried to destroy my life for $50,000, I told her. "You let them drag my name through the mud. Let everyone think I was a criminal. Let me get so low I almost killed myself. Face the consequences." She was led out to a police car, while neighbors watched from their windows, and the flashing lights reflected off the snow in the yard. And I learned later she was charged with conspiracy to commit fraud, wire fraud, and extortion, facing potential prison time that could be 18 months or more. The family members who remained started apologizing one by one, approaching me with uncomfortable expressions and words that sounded rehearsed or uncertain. Uncle Vernon said he was sorry for judging me so quickly, that he should have given me the benefit of the doubt. Aunt Shirley apologized for pulling her children away from me like I was dangerous, admitting she'd gotten caught up in the moment and hadn't thought critically. Cousins I barely knew expressed regret for condemning me, and Chester hugged me while crying and thanking me for not giving up. But standing there accepting these apologies, I felt hollow and disconnected, like I was watching the scene from outside my body. Their words didn't erase what they'd done, didn't undo the month of hell I'd lived through, didn't change the fact that not one of them had defended me when it mattered. They'd been willing to throw me away based on lies, and now they wanted forgiveness, because the lies had been exposed. But where was their doubt when it counted? Where was their loyalty when I needed it most? My mother approached me with mascara running down her cheeks, her hands reaching for mine, and she said she was so sorry and didn't know how to make this right. My father stood beside her, stiff and uncomfortable, and said they'd made a mistake, that I was their daughter and they should have protected me. But I looked at both of them and felt nothing except exhaustion and sadness. "You chose her over me, without even asking my side of the story," I said, my voice flat and tired. "You humiliated me in front of everyone. You were ready to cut me out of your lives permanently, based on forged documents. You didn't protect me, you attacked me, and the fact that you were manipulated doesn't change what you did or how it felt." They had no defense for that, no words that could make it better, and the silence stretched between us like a physical distance. The victory felt incomplete, tarnished, not at all like what Id imagined when Id planned this confrontation. Yes, my name was cleared legally, and the trust would be restored, with my inheritance protected. Yes, Felicia and Claudette had been exposed and would face consequences. Yes, the family finally knew the truth. But the emotional damage couldn't be undone with apologies and restored legal documents. I'd lost something fundamental at Thanksgiving that I could never get back. The illusion that my family loved me unconditionally. The belief that blood relations meant loyalty and protection. I'd learned that the people who were supposed to love me most in the world had been willing to destroy me when someone they liked better told them lies. That knowledge changed everything, poisoned every memory, made me question every interaction I'd ever had with any of them. I told my parents I needed time, that I couldn't just forgive and forget like nothing had happened, that they'd broken something in me that might never fully heal. My father's face got angry at that, his old authoritative self emerging again. "We apologized," he said. "What more do you want from us?" And that reaction told me everything I needed to know about whether they truly understood what they'd done. They wanted instant forgiveness, so they could feel better about themselves, so they could go back to normal without having to sit with their guilt or really examine their actions. My mother asked if I'd still come to Easter dinner in a few months. Asked it like the biggest problem was that I might skip a holiday meal, rather than that our relationship was fundamentally damaged. "No," I said. "I need space from all of you. I need time to figure out who I am without constantly trying to earn your love." The hurt on her face was real, but I couldn't let myself care about her pain when she hadn't cared about mine. Deanna drove me back to Boston that night, and I cried in the passenger seat, while Connecticut disappeared behind us. Why doesn't winning feel better? I asked her. And she said something that made sense even though it hurt. Because you wanted them to love you, not just believe you. You got justice, but you didn't get what you really needed, which was for them to have loved you enough to defend you from the beginning. 2 weeks later, my workplace received an anonymous complaint claiming it'd been embezzling from client funds, and I knew immediately it was Felicia's revenge, her refusal to accept defeat. An investigation was launched. I was suspended pending review, and even though all the evidence eventually proved the complaint was completely fabricated, the damage was done. My colleagues looked at me with suspicion, whispered when they thought I couldn't hear, and I realized Felicia would never stop attacking me, would never accept that she'd lost. 6 months have passed since that Christmas dinner confrontation, and I'm sitting in my new apartment in Boston writing this story down because I think other people need to hear it, need to know that family betrayal is real, and surviving it is possible. I moved to Boston permanently, took a job at a better social services agency that pays $45,000 instead of $38,000, found a small apartment that's actually nicer than the one I had in Connecticut, and started building a life that doesn't revolve around trying to earn love from people who were never going to give it. The workplace investigation cleared me completely after 2 months of stress, and when Felicia's involvement in the false complaint was discovered, she faced professional consequences. Her law firm let her go quietly to avoid scandal. The Bar Association opened an ethics investigation that's still ongoing, and I heard through Chester that Bradford filed for divorce and got primary custody of their children because Felicia's behavior had become too erratic and concerning. Claudette was convicted of conspiracy to commit fraud and sentenced to 18 months in prison, plus restitution, which means she has to pay me $15,000 over time for the damages her lies caused. I don't particularly care about the money, but I care deeply about the justice, about her facing real consequences for what she did. Felicia avoided criminal charges because she was smart enough to keep herself at arm's length from the most illegal parts of the conspiracy. But her life fell apart anyway. Her career is essentially over. Her marriage ended. Her reputation in the legal community is destroyed. And I heard she's living in a small apartment working as a paralegal at a strip mall law office, the kind of come down that must be killing her. Part of me feels satisfaction at that, and part of me just feels sad that it came to this at all. My parents try to reach out regularly, calling once a week and sending messages that I sometimes respond to and sometimes don't. I've attended a couple of family events in the past 6 months, but I never stay long, and I keep emotional distance that makes conversations awkward and superficial. Our relationship has changed permanently, and I don't think it will ever go back to what it was, even though what it was wasn't particularly good to begin with. I understand now that I was always the scapegoat in a narcissistic family dynamic, the child who existed to be blamed and criticized, so Felicia could be the golden child by comparison. Thanksgiving wasn't an aberration. It was the culmination of a pattern that had existed my entire life, and recognizing that pattern has been both painful and liberating. I'm in therapy now, working through the trauma of what happened and unpacking decades of family dysfunction that I denormalized because I didn't know any different. I've learned about narcissistic family systems, about golden children and scapegoats, about how some families need someone to be wrong so everyone else can feel right. I've learned that blood doesn't guarantee loyalty, that being related to someone doesn't mean they'll protect you, that sometimes the people who should love you most are the ones who hurt you worst. These lessons are hard and painful, but they're also freeing because they mean I can stop trying to earn something that was never available in the first place. I'm dating someone now, a kind man named Lane, who's an architect, who I met at a coffee shop when we both reached for the same book on a shelf. He knows my story, the whole ugly truth of it, and he didn't run away or judge me, or suggest I should just forgive and forget. He supports me going to therapy, respects my boundaries around family contact, and treats me with a gentleness that sometimes makes me cry because I didn't know relationships could be like this. Deanna remains my best friend, the person who literally saved my life that night on the bridge, and we have dinner together twice a week, where we talk about everything and nothing. I'm building a chosen family instead of relying on the family I was born into, surrounding myself with people who choose to be in my life rather than people who are obligated by blood to tolerate me. The lessons I've learned from this nightmare are ones I want to share with anyone who's going through something similar. Family can be the source of your deepest betrayal, and that's not your fault. You can't earn love from people who are determined not to give it. Standing up for yourself is hard but necessary, and sometimes you have to be your own hero because nobody else will do it for you. Evil triumphs when good people stay silent, So speaking your truth matters even when your voice shakes and you're terrified of the consequences. And most importantly, you can survive betrayal from the people you love most. You can build a new life. You can find peace and happiness even after everything falls apart. I'll never have the family I wanted, the parents I needed, the sister who could have been my friend instead of my enemy. But that's okay now. I've accepted that some losses are permanent, and some relationships can't be repaired. And acceptance doesn't mean I failed, it means I'm choosing reality over fantasy. I have peace now in a way I never had before. Peace that comes from knowing my own worth instead of waiting for others to validate it. Peace that comes from surrounding myself with people who genuinely care about me, rather than people who tolerate me out of obligation. Standing in my Boston apartment on a quiet Tuesday evening, looking out at the city lights and feeling content in a way I never thought possible 6 months ago, I think about that moment on the bridge, when I almost gave up. I think about my sister screaming, "Why are you even here?" About my parents saying I wasn't welcome, about Claudette's smug smile and the family's unanimous condemnation, and I realized that their question had an answer they didn't expect. I was there because I had a right to be there, because I deserved the truth and justice, because I was worth fighting for even if they couldn't see it. Now I know I don't need to be welcome in places that never felt like home. I found my own home, my own worth, my own family in the people who choose me every day. I survived. I fought back. I won. Not the family I wanted, but the peace I needed, and that's worth more than any inheritance or approval could ever be. So here's my question for you, and I really want to know your answer in the comments below. Have you ever been the scapegoat in your family? Or have you watched someone else be treated this way? How did you handle it? And what would you do differently if you could go back? Drop your stories in the comments because I think we all need to know we're not alone in these experiences. And if this story resonated with you, if you felt that pain of family betrayal, or that moment of almost giving up, please hit the like button so other people who need to hear this can find it. Subscribe to the channel because I'll be sharing more stories about surviving family trauma and building a life on your own terms. And share this video with someone who needs to know that family betrayal isn't the end of the story, that you can survive and even thrive after everything falls apart. Thank you for listening to my story, for letting me share the darkest and brightest moments of this journey with you. I hope that wherever you are right now, whatever family struggles you might be facing, you know that you deserve better than people who treat you as less than. You deserve love that doesn't come with conditions, support that doesn't require you to be perfect, family that can be built through choice rather than obligation. May you find your peace, build your chosen family, and never let anyone convince you that you're not worthy of love and respect. Take care of yourselves, protect your hearts, and remember that surviving is victory enough.